Now, part of our planning when we were discussing and getting together this program, we were thinking things like multiple intelligences, making sure that we're not just looking at one set of skills, not just linguistic or logical, mathematical or numerical, but we're also thinking naturalistic, communication skills, visual skills, so that and also physical activity. And so with the nature walk, it combines a lot of those skills. And when you're going on a really good nature walk, what we want to think about is how do we engage all of our senses, but also how do we build our capacity. And that's where we talk about planning skills. And in our workbook, we have a really simple sheet that we expect you to use loads, and it's Design Task Planning Guide. And it's just 4 simple little boxes. And all you're going to do in those boxes is, what are my goals for this task? What is it that I want to do or I want to achieve in this task? What possible ideas of how I might get that done? What tasks do I need to do to get that done? And make up my action plan. Now, that box you can draw on a whiteboard, that box you can take out a sheet of wallpaper and put it on a sheet of wallpaper and fill it in as you go along. You might use post-it notes and write down loads of different ideas and pop them up on the wall. So again, you don't have to use the sheet is a guide and it allows you to kind of navigate that. But when we think about doing a nature walk, what we really want to think about is getting out in the world. And it's a really, really great way of building your communication skills as well. Because you might invite somebody else to go on the nature walk with you. It might be a way of bringing a friend, getting out and doing an activity together. But because you're doing something together, it's less stressful because you're both moving forward, you're both having a task. And you might do things like a scavenger hunt. So you might decide that we're going to go for a nature walk and let's identify 5 or 6 things we need to find. Things that we want, it might be insects, it might be plants, it might be natural features, things like water, stone, different types of trees, smaller sapling trees. It might be looking for maybe some natural wildlife that exists in the area. You can do it in a way that you're giving yourself a task as you go out and you're going on the nature walk, but also that you are planning something ideally that's new for you. Not something that if you're used to going for a walk through your local park all of the time, that can be a really interesting nature walk, but you're very familiar with it. So it's to try and look at areas maybe within your local community that you're not familiar with. But again, remember, you're always going with the support of the adult who's working with you on the program. It's not something you're going to necessarily go off and kind of do by yourself. Is our nature walk something that you would have used a lot in primary schools?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as you say, it kind of depends on what you can do, those kind of SMART goals. So I would have had experience of where, it was really only appropriate, certainly with younger classes, to go around the school, but luckily the school that I was in, we had a huge area around us. And one of the activities that I would have done, I suppose, after the nature walk was it's a lovely way to integrate it with art. And to collect all different textures of leaves and plants and then make a collage of all those different textures. I have a distinct memory of a beautiful piece that was created by a child, and it was all pastel colours, all different textures, all different leaves and plants. It was absolutely amazing. So there's lots of different activities you can do following on from a nature walk. But I was thinking there about what you were saying, Billy, about making it kind of somewhere you've not been before. And you can also kind of make them, whatever nature walk you do, you can make it of interest to that particular child or young person that you are working with. So a nature walk on a beach is going to be very, very different to a nature walk in a park or near the mountains. You could do a couple of different ones and compare what you found, all those, and the different types of wildlife you saw, the different types of plants, and all the different activities that you did afterwards. So that's one particularly that sounds so simple but can be stretched out so much, and you could have days of work in just that one activity.
And from a secondary school, we don't really use them in the same way.
No, not really. I don't think, not the way that primary school would use them, do you know what I mean? But having said that, that wouldn't mean that you wouldn't, students who would be of secondary school age wouldn't actually go on a nature walk, do you know what I mean? But I think going back to what you were saying about the park and the local one, I think the challenge might be to go somewhere that little bit different for you and to plan that. or also like if there's water there, there might be a stream, or there might be a little waterfall, or there might be something there that also there's the opportunity maybe there to actually, just take off the shoes and the socks and, just tip the toes in if the student felt like it, but obviously being prepared for that then with your towel and things like that to come along. But that can bring the experience again, because then they get into the water and they maybe see the different, like if there's a little fish or insect, anything like that, that would be slightly different to what they might see in the woodland, let's say, or something like that. And definitely like that now again, collecting stuff and bringing it back. Even, stones if they were in the beach, and that's something that we'll look at later on, what we could do with that. And those kind of things can really make it exciting. And the picnic, bringing the picnic, and we're going to look at planning the picnic and what would that look like. So yeah, I mean again, it's huge. It could definitely spread over the 2 weeks.
And it might not be a single event. You might do a number of nature walks, but it's also important to remember the sensory input of certain nature walks. So you might find in certain areas that would be very, very busy, that busyness might make a young person feel a little bit overwhelmed or uncomfortable. So be thinking about all of those potentials, making sure that you're considering the impact of, let's say, somewhere that's very breezy and very open compared to, I really love walking in forests. I love the calmness and the coolness and the darkness of walking in a forest, whereas another person might like something very open and bright like a beach. Another student going to a beach, the sand might be a real issue. So even considering all of those sensory issues that might be involved in a nature walk, and appropriately planning and organising. So if, let's say, sand was a real issue, it might be something that in advance of the nature walk, you get a sandbox, you do some practice with sand, you get involved in making sure that it's clean sand, very important. But making sure again that you get involved and you do the prep for something like a nature walk. The other thing that's important is to think about how you might use that, and Hannah has just mentioned it, how you might use it for the examples. One of the things we're going to be talking about is making a motivational poster, or making bunting. We're going to talk about making bunting now in a moment as a way of making a visual representation of a message or an idea or a creative process. So you might take your phone with you on the nature walk and take loads of pictures. Take loads of pictures of wildlife or plants or leaves or textures, and use those as part of, maybe you might print those out or get them printed out, and then cut those up to make a collage. You might use those as a backdrop. We're going to show you a couple of motivational posters, and by just using simple photographs, and again a really simple, you put it on a Word document, open a Word document, import your photograph, put your statement underneath the photograph, and you're building up your own motivational poster. And these can be the kinds of messages that remind a young person to feel confident about returning to school, to feel safe about asking for help as they get back into the school system, to feel open about asking the right questions and supporting other young people as they get back into school. Because everybody, irrelevant of what stage of school you're in, we're all going to need help to adjust back in. So building up their capacity is really important. So you want the challenge part of this program to be a challenge, but not to be overwhelming. And finding that point between what's a good challenge and what will be overwhelming for the young person is all about communication with the young person, and the young person talking about what that might work out, or what that might look like, or how that might feel. And in the workbook we have given a kind of a target setting sheet, and it uses a really simple scale on a scale of 1 to 10. And using scales are a brilliant way of exposing a young person to how they feel about a situation. So let's say if I had a scaling conversation with Hannah now for a second, and I was going to ask Hannah that we were going to go on a nature walk, Hannah, and we're going to go to a forest. And how comfortable, on a scale of 1 to 10, Hannah, 10 being you're absolutely comfortable being in a big open forest, you're really looking forward to being in that environment, you've been in forests loads of times before, and you feel really comfortable in that environment. 1 being you really don't like the sound of that at all. On a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable would you feel, Hannah, about going for a walk in the forest?
I would give that maybe a 6.5 to a 7. I like forests, I've been in them before. I prefer a beach. That's just me. Somebody else might have a different, might scale that differently. I'm not a huge fan of bugs, and they're more prevalent in a forest, so that would be why I would prefer a beach. But it's nice to have that scale so that you can get an understanding of, before you go, how comfortable that young person will be and what you might need to do, and you might be surprised by the answers as well.
So when they scale, it's very important when you use a scale, you name the scale. So a comfortable confident scale, a comfortable scale, a listening scale, an understanding scale. You can't just say on a scale, you have to name the scale. So Hannah said to me kind of a 6.5. So then the next thing I would ask to see what makes Hannah comfortable about that is, what about that activity means that you'd give it a 6.5, not a 5 or a 4? What do you feel comfortable about the idea of going to a forest?
That I've been there before, that I kind of know what to bring now. If it was a totally new forest that I hadn't been to before, I might be a little bit less comfortable. I might be maybe down at a 5 maybe. But if I was going to even kind of in an area that I had been before, I would be about a 6.5. I would know what to bring if I was going with people who were familiar to me as well. If you were sending me off there on my own, I think I'd be down at a 3 or a 4.
Okay. And what else might mean that you're more comfortable with it? Mean that you would give it a 4 or 5 even? Anything else? Things like other people being there with you?
Yeah, I think for me, definitely the familiarity of having people that I'm familiar with, knowing where I'm going, maybe knowing a route, maybe knowing I'm not walking aimlessly around the forest, maybe knowing if I have things that I need to look for, having a plan would definitely make me more comfortable.
Okay. And if you imagined that you were a 7.5 or an 8 on that walk, what might be different, do you think? And this is the important part of a scale. You go one step up from where the young person have identified themselves. So it doesn't matter if they give themselves a 3 or a 2 or a 4. What might it look like if it was a 5? What might it look like if it was just, not that it should be a 10? They're not going to be Bear Grylls at the end of this. The idea being is that they're building capacity. So what might be different if you were an 8 for that walk?
Maybe having kind of a sense of achievement, maybe afterwards I might term it as an 8, so that, and I think that thing that I mentioned about having a plan and knowing what we have to do on that walk, I think afterwards, if I had felt that I had done a really good job and I had all my people that were familiar and I was in a familiar-ish kind of place, and I had achieved what had been set out, then I might look back on it and say it was an 8. But it's important to remember as well that that might be I'm finding that challenging to answer. So that might be those might be quite challenging questions for a young person to answer. So they may need to really be supported through that.
Yeah, and it's around using that conversation in a developmentally appropriate way. So how I might have that conversation with a 13 or a 14-year-old might look and sound very differently. And actually, one of the loveliest ways of using scaling, and you can even use post-it notes, is to put the numbers up on the wall and ask them to go where they might feel they would be on that scale. So you can actually turn it into a really interesting movement activity as well. So you can put them on the ground, you could be outside and use stones, we can use some of the stones, or dots, but the whole idea being is that you're having a conversation around what makes that young person feel safer on the activity and what would provide a little bit of challenge. And it's always about the appropriate level of challenge. And that might mean that the first nature walk you do is just around the school, looking and observing what you see in your environment, before we take maybe a bigger nature walk the following week in another activity or stretching it out a little bit further. Is there anything we haven't maybe discussed or touched on around that nature walk now that you feel that we want to maybe add in?
I think just another activity from a kind of early years primary perspective, and I know we had kind of discussed it earlier on around using story for the nature walk, so kind of collecting things and then retelling the story of your nature walk through the objects that you have collected. Or I think another nice thing that's kind of going to fit into a bit of what we do later is collecting leaves, collecting stones, and then making them into characters, which we can use then in lots of different activities that we're going to discuss over the next the next few episodes. episodes on this.
And also one of the things that is to use, so as Hannah was saying there, collecting artefacts, but for the student who likes to write, it might be then that they use those artefacts to write a story or create a story, and then they get the opportunity to develop that in the written form. Whereas another student might be really interested in photography or documentary or filmmaking, and they might record some of their journey and create maybe a short story with a small video content. And again, there's loads of technology that you can use, apps on your phone, etc., that will allow you to do that in an appropriate way. And also for the creative student, the student who loves to draw and make and build from experience, that kinesthetic experience of the touch of material, that can also be very appropriate for that student to maybe build something, maybe build a sculpture, build a three-dimensional art piece, make a small installation, do a visual box where they create using those artifacts or elements with the bunting, things like creating the bunting and then sticking maybe leaves or images to represent that week. Or you might even decide, when we're looking at the bunting now in a moment, you might do like a bunting diary. So for the 10 days of your program, you have a different bunting triangle and you put maybe ideas or images of the things you did on that day, that it's like a visual representation. And again, building capacity. So for those students who maybe don't necessarily use as much visuals, is to try and maybe do a little bit more of that. So we're going to move on now, and we're going to talk a little bit around physical activity and movement.